Good evening, everyone, to the Best Practices Session 6, wrapping up the season. Today we have a full agenda with different speakers. We'll be talking about climate, the characteristics of the fruit. We'll have a small news section, a discussion with Muttart, a new grower, to share her experience. We'll recap a little bit of the main activities, and we'll finish with our typical discussion between Steve Ells and Marcel Kolb. And to begin this session, I would like to introduce Jeff Franklin. Till now, everybody well know him, working at AFC, to give us a wrap up of the climatic conditions and also to provide some feedback of the first bud hardiness reports of the season. Jeff, please.
Thank you, Francisco. Get my screen up here. So can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. How about now?
Now it's great. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So thanks for inviting me back again. It's always a pleasure to talk to this group. Always fun to share something that I'm quite passionate about. So let's move right into it. So, you know, I put this, I've been working on this graph. I think I've shared this every year for the last couple of years, as long as I've been doing this. And I just keep adding to it as the season goes on, because it is one of those graphs that in a snapshot kind of shows us where we've been and gives the year review, but I'll go over it in case people forget the details of it. So what I'm showing here, the individual black dots are the 2021 daily mean temperatures. So we've got one of those points for every day of the year so far up to early December. And I show this in comparison to the gray line, which is the 10-year trend line, and it's a trend line based on temperatures for the past 10 years. So it's essentially, the gray line is what we would expect the temperature to be on any given day. So the reason I kind of like this plot and why I think it's quite descriptive is that if the black dots are clustered over the gray line, then we're above average. If they're clustered around the gray line, we're average, and if they're below the gray line, then we're below average. Now, this 2021 has been quite a remarkable year in that we've spent most of the year above average. We've had a few times, July and I guess the second half of February, where we were trending below average temperatures. But for the most part, we've been average or above average. But to put maybe some more parameters around this, just to talk about maybe how this affected the grape crop. So we estimate, and again, I'm taking a lot of data from our research vineyard. Our early bud break for hybrids was around May 15th. And our harvest window ended around 31st of October, and that was for some of our vinifera varieties that we were carrying for still. So that gives us about a 5.5 month window, crop window for grape. And to put a bit more information on here, our veraison windows extended kind of from the first week of August until the third week of August. And that's when we saw all of our major varieties, all the varieties in our vineyard, sort of begin veraison. So the good news, and you can kind of see this looking at the plot, through most of that time, from bud break through to harvest, we were trending above average. A bit of an exception in July, although it didn't have a major impact on how things went. Well, one thing I like about the way the data shapes up this year is if you look at when bud break to harvest, 5.5 months, veraison is roughly centered in between those two things. And that's kind of a classic, a good situation for grapes to be in. If you were to look at a textbook phenological chart of how the major stages of grapefruit break out through the year, it would kind of look like that, with veraison kind of centered in the middle. And we know there's been some years where that hasn't happened, 2019 being the most recent, where veraison was shifted too close to harvest, and of course it never got that full fruit maturity. I'm not going to say a whole lot about fruit maturity. I know other people are going to talk about that tonight, but just overall from the position of temperatures, things shaped up really well this year. Now, just to put some numbers on that, as I just sort of mentioned earlier, so we have been at or above the mean average temperature every month of the growing season, with the exception of July. In some of those months, like June, we were almost 3 degrees ahead of the average. It was extraordinary. Some of the other months we weren't ahead by a lot, but in all those months we were ahead. And I guess the only month that we just broke even was November, although outside of the growing season, but certainly in recent memory, November did seem more like a typical November from past years. And again, I compare this year, the column for 2021, the mean temperature, to the 10-year average. And I find that the 10-year average is the most relevant because, for one thing, it's the one that's in our minds, in our memories. We remember those growing seasons. And as we see things shift, we see average temperatures rise over time. Talking about long-term averages, 25 and 30 years, is no longer that relevant. Or certainly, I don't feel that it is. So I often compare things to a 5 or 10-year average. So if you looked at this, you thought, well, everything in grapes was perfect. Why is it everybody growing grapes? It seems like an unchallenging year, but oh, sorry. For that, we'll talk about heat units, so degree days. So we talk about degree days in grape growing mainly because we know that heat is a good model or a good proxy for development. So showing this year, the 2021 heat units are the thick red line, and the dashed black line kind of below that is the 10-year average. And I've thrown some other years in there just for contrast. For instance, you can see here, this is 2019. This is where we finished out in 2019 in terms of heat. Definitely an outlier and one of the lowest we've seen in a long time. So the take home from this, if we sort of go and review, before June, or around the 1st of June, we were about average. We weren't nothing extraordinary. But then, of course, as soon as June hit, we were well above average. And again, that plus 2.9 degrees above average temperature through the month of June. July was a little sluggish, and we actually lost a little bit of ground in comparison to other years. But then we finished off of the fall with well above average. And that was a good time of year to have heat. And I would anticipate, and I guess others will speak to this, that we saw some good acid reduction in some of our long-hanging varieties because of this extra heat. But again, as I was just leading up to, you would wonder why everybody isn't growing grapes or maybe other tree fruit given this type of a situation. But of course, that's not the only story. And then we turn to precipitation. So this is a plot, same thing as the first one I showed. I show this one every time I speak, and I just keep adding on to it, adding more data to it. The thicker red line is the 2021 data. The black line is, of course, the 10-year mean, and I've thrown in many other years just to give some reference, just so you can see how precipitation tends to increase. And you can sort of see the spread, the variation from year to year. So right now we are running, around 1,000, 1,100 millimeters of rain. That is above average. Just point out some things here. So where we are here is still above average. We were below average right up till the middle of July. We had some heavy rains in July, and we've had a series of fairly heavy rains followed by just a good number of overall rainy days all through the summer, right in through the fall. We are still running below 2019 in terms of overall rain, overall precipitation for the full year. Because 2019, if you remember, was rainy all year long, not just from the middle of summer onwards. It was the whole year was rainy, right through bud break, right through all of it. And also I can contrast that to 2020, which is the sort of purple line down below the average. It was well below average. And actually, I think almost for us, an ideal season for growing grapes. But there's a couple things of interest, and the reason I show this plot, the reason I drag it out the way I do, because there's some patterns that start to emerge here. It has this real stair step kind of a shape, and those stair steps are, if you think about it, they're quite meaningful. So, for instance, right here, this spot in 2019 where plot goes almost vertical, that's a huge rain event in a single day. So then in that case, because the spread between the grid lines was about 100 millimeters. So that was actually Hurricane Dorian that I just pointed to, and I'll point it out again. That was Hurricane Dorian, which gave us 112 millimeters of rain in a single day. And so if you sort of start to look at all of these different traces for the different years, there's a lot of these events, these big rainfall events. And I consider a big rainfall event to be greater than 50 millimeters, or if you prefer to think of it that way, more than 2 inches. Anything above that's a fairly heavy rain if we receive that within a day. And we'll find in a lot of cases that's at the lower threshold for where damage starts to happen. We're starting to see soil erosion. We may see infrastructure damage, so on and so forth. So I just thought as an exercise, I would go through and mark out on this plot as many of the above 50 millimeter events as I could. And so as I went and just kept going, I think I ended up at around 20. And these have happened across all years, not just this year, many years. We've seen this, oops, too far. We've seen these large rain events. We seem to get several a year, virtually every year now. It's hard for us to go back and compare historically. We do have some data on this, but it is, when I look at this, it is clear that from about the middle of the summer on through harvest, we have there's a fairly high probability that we're going to receive a greater than 50 millimeter rain event. And these things seem to be clustered a little bit towards the fall. And if we look back here, earlier in the season, so winter and June, when you would think we actually get more precipitation, we get steady precipitation, but we tend not to get these very large events, the 50 millimeters or more. So that's the characteristic of Nova Scotia weather. These marks I put on the plot aren't indicative of any single year. They're spread across all kinds of years, and I would suspect that almost every year has at least one or two of those. And that has become a reality of late summer and fall in Nova Scotia. So just to drill down a little bit more on our sort of veraison and harvest season, this bar chart just shows cumulative precipitation for August, September, and October, measured at the Kempfel Research Station. So we finished out that 3-month period with 355 millimeters of rain compared to a 10-year average of 308 millimeters. Now, what's interesting here, if you look at just the number of rainy days that we have had in that period, we had 36 rainy days in the months of August, September, and October of 2021. And that's compared to a 10-year average of 41 days. Now, I kind of had the feeling that we were having more rainy days this year than we had in the past, but that doesn't bear out in the data at all. In fact, it looks like we had fewer rainy days. And since we have above average rain in fewer days, so that does kind of support the theory that rain events are getting larger, getting bigger. We're getting more in one shot, which is going to be a challenge. It will be a challenge going forward. Now, we haven't had the catastrophic rains like they've had north of us here, but nonetheless, we're still getting and definitely impacted as an agricultural region. So yes, overall above average precipitation in August, September, but it was below average in October. So that's how we arrived at the 355 millimeters. And of course, the implications of this are diseases such as botrytis, which was crazy this year. Botrytis and downy mildew thrive in wet conditions. And also later in the season, the harvest window that I'm talking about now, fruit splitting just makes the disease and insect problems even worse. So it was challenging in terms of managing those things. And as you can see, this is why. So looking just across the province at accumulated precipitation for that same period of time, August, September, and October, we see sort of Halifax and Kempfel were the high water mark, 375 for Halifax, 354 for Kempfel. We go to the north and we go to the south, of course, there's slightly less. Of course, that trend doesn't hold out anymore. Since in the month of November, the north went way ahead of us in accumulated precipitation just on one or two events. So again, as we saw this set up in the summer, and it continued on through late summer and in through the fall, that there was a center of the province that we're seeing higher rainfall amounts than they were on either side of us. So if you're listening in from an area outside, like from Yarmouth or down that way, or maybe up around Malagash, you may not be, you would not have had the exact same experience that we had right here in the valley. And you probably saw slightly less lower precipitation amounts. So when I see Nice warm temperatures. Of course, it's going to be indicative of warm ground temperatures. An important part of the grape physiology that we often don't take into consideration because it's not seen is, of course, the temperature in the root zone. And one thing that can definitely undermine that temperature in the root zone is a lot of precipitation. However, looking at the soil temperatures from Kentville at roughly 35 centimeters, so in that rooting zone for grapes, we've certainly had some fluctuating temperatures. And again, the 2021 data is the thick red line. We've definitely had some fluctuating temperatures, and those major fluctuations were brought about by big rain events. But overall, we finished ahead of where the last 5 years has been. So we had a very good year in terms of soil temperatures. So that translates into good nutrient uptake. It also extends into, especially for people who've planted new grapes or even younger vines, that root genesis period, the period where the roots expand, happens in the fall, usually after we take off the crop. If the soil temperatures remain warm, then there's a lot of active root growth. And of course, that's important for supporting the plant into future years, and for getting that maximum productivity over the plant and having it fully established. So again, I think we did well in that area this year. Certainly very pleased to see that data finishing up the way it did. So for us, our harvest window ended almost the last day of October, and a week later we moved into our next major project, which is bud hardiness. And by bud hardiness, I'm talking about the viability of buds as a function of temperature. And we know physiologically that right around harvest time, our buds aren't, the buds that set up in the summer that will be all of our new growth for next year, they're not very hardy, and they continue to get hardier on through the winter. And right through till February, they reach their deep winter values, and then they'll start that slow climb out of those values up towards bud break in the spring. So we put this report, we do the survey every 2 weeks. We put this data up on the CGCN website. I've left a link at the bottom. But in case you've never thought about this or looked at this plot, let me go through it a little bit to explain it. So each one of these major sets of points here are an actual survey date. So we've had 3 surveys so far this year: November 8th, November 22nd, and December 6th. And on those dates, we take samples of 5 varieties. We've focused our survey on 5 varieties. So Chardonnay, Luckett Blanc, Marquette, Pinot Noir, and Riesling. And if you look closely at this, the Marquette, the blue line, is the one that's closest to the bottom. So we would consider that to be the hardiest variety of the 5 that we're tracking in the survey. And sort of on the top, the Riesling and Chardonnay, the yellow and green lines, typical vinifera, they're not going to be as hardy as a hybrid. And they're certainly a little slower to reach those deeper winter values. So when we talk about hardiness, we're literally talking, what we're using here, what we're talking about is the temperature at which those buds would freeze and causing bud death, irreversible damage. So that's where, so the axis on the left-hand side, temperature degrees Celsius, so that's actually the temperature where 50% of these buds would freeze. And as you can see, we are progressing in a downward trend, which means that hardiness is actually increasing. So over time here, as every successive survey, we see that the buds are a little bit hardier than they were before. And this trend will continue on. It'll continue on until probably about the middle of February, where they'll reach the deep winter minimum values, which will be around -25 for vinifera varieties and closer to -30 for some of the hybrids. And so we watch that. We've been doing this now for, I think, 5 or 6 years. And one thing that we do notice, varieties almost always end up at the same level of hardiness in deep winter, but how fast they get there in the fall and how fast they come out of that hardiness in the spring, that's variable from year to year. So there is a little bit of activity here. There's something a little bit dynamic that goes on, has to do with length of harvest, length of the growing season and crop load and things like that. But so anyway, that graph is already available in our report that we put out every 2 weeks. But I thought I would just break the data down just a little bit more, just to show you something that we've been watching just recently. So I've just isolated 2 varieties here, Chardonnay and Luckett Blanc. And this line here, this what I call 50% bud death, that's the same line that was in for the Chardonnay in the previous graph. And the same for the Lackady. 50% bud death for Lackady would happen at these temperatures over time. Because if you look at the x-axis, what we have here is the 3 different survey dates. And so what we're seeing is the same thing I talked about before. 50% bud death will occur at, occur at lower temperatures as we've progressed through the fall and into December. In fact, we're seeing for Lackady right now, we would see 50% bud death, at about almost minus 25. So even Chardonnay, we wouldn't see 50% bud death till, say, we saw minus 22. That's not likely at this time of year, but we can also estimate lesser amounts of bud damage, 10% bud death. And as you can see, those would occur at much higher temperatures. And sort of for each variety in our survey, I sort of watch this closely because it is not uncommon for us to have a minus 18, minus 19 in December. It's happened in the last few years. And so we breathe a sigh of relief here in Kenfall at the research station when we see that that LTE10 or that 10% bud death projection drop below minus 20. If we look over here at Lackady, well, we're already well below that. We wouldn't see, it would take minus 21 degrees or so before we would even see 10% bud death. But Chardonnay isn't quite there. It's still hovering around minus 18, minus 19. And of course, there's some variability here from site to site. So not every site is down to minus 19. Some are more like minus 17. So we watch this closely. We want to see the physiology progress. And try to get an idea, because sometimes we have very low levels of damage that can occur when we get the cold snaps in December. And this is one way that we try to watch that and make an estimate of whether or not we've exceeded the sort of temperature profile for that, low temperature profile for that variety. Seasonal forecast from Environment Canada. We're in a good position again. Last winter, very similar position to what we were in last winter. So this long-term forecast looks at chance of above or below average temperatures, in this case for December, January, and February. So this is these plots are available on the website. They put another one out every month. It extends to 1 month more in the future. So anything that's in this sort of blue colored zone has some better than average probability of having below average temperature. So we see that from Manitoba West. They're likely going to have a colder than average winter for these 3 months. But on the East Coast, and we've been here more often than not, we actually have a better than average probability for having above average temperatures. And I think that's in the, if I'm reading that correctly, 60 to 70% range for, or no, 70 to 80. For some parts of Nova Scotia, that we're going to have above average temperatures December through February. That doesn't mean we won't have isolated events of cold weather, but overall, if we were to take the average temperature at the end of February, there's a probability that we're going to see above average temperature. So that's good. Puts less stress on the vines. We see less challenges in terms of bud hardiness, and hopefully that leads us to a reasonable spring. So again, I just would like to thank, when we talk about bud hardiness, we have the machinery, we put the manpower into it, but certainly the donation of the land and the vines and the canes all comes from the growers, comes from you. Thanks to Perennia for hosting a report every 2 weeks and for their support, and to GGANS and the growers for giving us access to the sites and being able to make this calculation. So that's all I have. Any questions?
Thank you, Jeff, for your presentation. I would like also to remind to everyone that the reports are available, as Jeff said, on the Grape blog, and also all of them from the season 2021 and 2021-22 are available on the webpage at Perennia. So if you want to search or take a look to one of the reports, please take a look to the webpage or the Grape blog. So any questions, please write on the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. So Jeff, how many growing degree days we had in total compared the average?
So this year, growing degree days, the way that they're typically calculated in Grape, we exceeded 1,200 this year. I'm pretty sure. And if I went back to that plot, I'm not going to, but we were above, pretty sure we're above 1,200 this year, which is kind of a benchmark. When you get above 1,200, better chances of pulling off a nice, mature, fully ripened crop. We don't get that every year, but we have tended, I think in the last, let's say four to 5 years, or 3 out of 5 years, we've been at or very close to 1,200. So.
Thank you, Jeff. So if we don't have any questions, Steve.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeff. I always enjoy the weather data. I could probably ask you 5 or 6 questions, but Francisco would probably be very angry at me. So I'll ask you them at a later time when we're not taking up air time here. But thanks very much. No, it was, I mean, it wraps it up pretty nice. It was a fantastic start and a challenging middle and a pretty good end to the season. But yeah, it was a pretty good season overall. So now I'd like to welcome Neslihan Ivit, our winemaking specialist with Perennia, to give us her take on vintage 2021, how the season wrapped up and what we can expect in the wine possibly.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here and wrap the season up. Can everybody see the slide?
Yes, looks perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So yes, I will be talking about the grape ripening, and I will start with the parameters just to refresh our memories, which parameters that we will be focusing on tonight and why to measure them. And I will give a small news for the next harvest. It will be a good news. And then I will continue with the results, all the results that I received from you and from A-Lab. And that will be the sampling base, how the sugar accumulation was, how the acidity was, and a special paragraph for Luckett Vineyards. And then I will finish with a surprise slide. So bear with me until the end. So the grape ripening parameters, what we will be talking about tonight is mostly about sugar accumulation and the acidity. In sugar accumulation, I will be focusing on Brix, glucose and fructose, and the potential alcohol. And in acidity, we will see the results of pH, total acidity, tartaric acid, and malic acid. But why to measure these parameters? Just to refresh our memories. Of course, the first one is to track ripeness and decide the harvest date, which is the most important reason why to track these parameters. But also, we can have a historical data of different plots and the varieties. Actually, the results that I collected from A-Lab and from you, we have kind of an historical data of the last 3 years, which is very good to have it in the end. And if you have it for your own winery, then you can kind of go back every year and to the exact date and see how you're at in the ripening process, which is very valuable. And finally, you can also, for the winemakers, it's very important because, of course, with these parameters, we can define a wine style that we can produce. And also when we have to decide which techniques to apply to target that specific wine style that we are aiming. So these are the 3 main reasons why we do that. So I have a good news for the next harvest about the grape ripening, but I was thinking maybe you will say, oh, Nestle, we don't want to hear about the next harvest yet. We just finished this one. But then when I was reading a little bit, I found an article titled, "It's never too early to start thinking about harvest." And it really resonated with me. So I really want to give you this news. So for the grape ripening package at A-Lab, I know that most of you have been using this package, which give a good variety of the parameters. Now there's a new pricing. That was before it was $25. And now if you sample your grapes and crush yourself and bring the must, that will be analyzed at $10. And if you don't have time to crush them, you can bring the whole grapes, and that will be charged at $20. So I just wanted to put this seed in your mind for the next season, because there are a lot of good range of analysis that you can get in this package, and it's a very good value. So with this good news, I will pass to the results of this year, but I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to let you know that this year, unfortunately, we didn't get a lot of results from different growers. The results were more focused on the one part of the province. So it's not, when I give the results from the last year, it will not be the same variety. As also in the variety side, this year we didn't have analysis of the hybrids, especially of the red hybrids. We didn't receive any of them. So just keep in mind that mainly it will be a little bit more focused, the results. So also I wanted to mention the sampling dates. As you can see, we have been receiving samples in different dates throughout these 3 years. Just to give you this, to also make you aware that the sampling didn't made in the same day, so it might have a variance depending on the dates as well. So we pass to the sugar accumulation. Again, as I said, this is average of all the results from A lab and shared anonymously, and I take the average of all of them. So in 2021, we had a Brix of 18.75, which was higher compared to the previous years. And in glucose fructose, we had 182.9 gram per liter of glucose and fructose, and that corresponds to a potential alcohol around 10.6. So just looking at these results, we can see that the ripeness was a little bit higher from the year before, and quite high compared to 2019. And going back to the acidity parameters, we see the pH value, average pH value of 3.02, total acidity of 8.2 gram per liter. When we look at the tartaric, we had 5.8 gram per liter and a malic acid of 4.1 gram per liter. Again, if we compare with the previous years, we see that the grapes show a higher ripeness compared to the previous years. And I give a special chapter for Le Cadiblan, of course, the most planted variety of our province and a very versatile variety that we can make different styles of wines. So I give a special part for that. In sugar accumulation, again, we see the same trends as the all grapes. The Brix values were around 18.4. Again, a quite difference compared to the previous years, with a glucose fructose value of 178, and that corresponds to a potential alcohol of 10.35. And when we see the acidity parameters, again, we see the same trends. We had a pH of 307 and a total acidity of 7.8, and tartaric acid of 6 gram per liter and malic acid of 3.6 gram per liter, which again, compared to the previous years, it shows a higher ripeness. With that, I am finishing. I'm finishing the slides, the contents, and I'm passing to my surprise slide, which is about Champagne. So Champagne, like most of you know, it's a region in France very famous with their traditional method sparkling wines. And in Nova Scotia, we also produce very high quality traditional method sparkling wines. And we often hear that there are resemblances between these two regions. And what I did, actually, I find some values in Champagne region where they collected different type of grapes that they produce, actually mainly 3 varieties, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay. And every year they take averages and they publish with the growers. And I found some values of 10-year average between 1998 and 2007. And I wanted to share this with you, but of course not to compare with our results. I just wanted to show you because of course they have different values, and I don't know if our method of analysis were the same. Probably they were not. So it's not very healthy to compare, but just empirically, I wanted to show you these results. So if we see the potential alcohol in Champagne, it was 9.9, and in Nova Scotia in the last 3 years, it's 10.1. The pH in Champagne 3.11, while in Nova Scotia 3.02, quite close. In tartaric acid, in total acidity in terms of tartaric acid, in Champagne it was 11.3, while in Nova Scotia 10.7. In tartaric acid in Champagne 7.3, while in Nova Scotia 6.5. And finally, the malic acids are in the same level. I just wanted to show you, and actually it's not a surprise that both regions produce traditional metal sparkling wines, because the key of this method is to have lower alcohol and higher acidity in the grapes, which will be very useful for the production method. So that's why in this table, we can clearly see both regions have the same trend of having lower potential alcohol and higher acidity. And with that, I finish my presentation. We just see the grape ripening parameters and kind of remember why we were measuring them. And I gave a good news for the next harvest about the discounted A-Lab. And I give a summary of the grape ripening results, and overall we see a higher ripeness compared to previous years. And finally, we finished the results, grape ripening results in Champagne. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I can answer, or you can just write me an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Neslihan, for your presentation. If somebody has any question, please, you can type in the Q&A feature on the bottom. Neslihan, could you repeat the prices from A-Lab for next year?
Sure. So if you sample your grapes and crush them yourself and bring A-Lab as juice sample, that costs $10. But if you don't have time to crush them at A-Lab, they will crush them for you, and that will be at a charge of $20. And there are more information on the webpage. I can also put it in the chat, where there are some specifications on how much berries, how much must to bring, and at what time to bring. So for the next year, it will be important to keep those in mind as well.
Thank you, Neslihan.
Thank you.
One question, Neslihan, from Don. Thanks, Neslihan. Just wondering if the grape ripening values were all at their peak. For example, the last one, like at actual harvest.
Yes, that's a very good question. I wish I knew it actually, because the samples that arrive in the beginning of the season, they are sometimes for sparkling wine, or sometimes the producer might wonder how the ripening going. So I cannot really tell that if they are on the peak. The ones that we receive towards end of the ripening and end of October and November, I can say that they were at their peak. But when we talk about in a general way, I cannot really say if all the samples were at their full ripeness. Also because it kind of changed depending on the different style of wine that they will produce. So in that sense, this is just an empirical average that we took.
Don, thanks. Your answer, Neslihan. So do you recall the range, like the highest Britzes?
No, I actually didn't get that higher than lower one, again, with the same idea of just to get an average and share with you. Also because they are kind of shared anonymously, and I didn't want to kind of point out only one result in that way. That's why I cannot really tell more details.
Just to complement, Don, I saw in some places like up to 20, 21, 22 bricks, like very late in the season. I think that part can be discussed in the panel between Steve and Marcel.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, Neslihan. That was really interesting, and it's so exciting to see those trends over the last 3 years. I mean, grape quality, right, is getting better. It's nice to see that rebound from a tough year in 19, and everything's getting better. And pretty encouraging seeing those numbers, how close we are to the Champagne region. So yeah, not much wonder our sparkling wine is pretty darn good. So yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. No, I was very excited for that result as well. That's why I wanted to share with you, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks. So our next speaker tonight is new and not new to best practices, because I think she almost always tunes in to watch, but we've talked her into joining us. Anne-Marie Muttart is a new grower over in the Stars Point area, and she's going to share some of her story, how she's gone from few vines in the ground to her first harvest this year. So thanks very much for joining us, Anne-Marie.
Hello.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, to participate in this new or small section, just to know a little more about the experience. So, Anne-Marie, when did you start growing grapes, and which were your first steps?
So in 2018, we were thinking about it. We had a site, and we really did our research to make sure that the site was good for grapes. So we knew that it was one of the first fields that farmers were able to get on in the spring, and so we felt we had pretty good draining soil. But all the things that you look for, the south-facing, gentle slope. We have a close proximity to the Minas Basin, where we're a little bit in a protected area. So once we sort of ticked off those boxes, we then reached out with Perennia and yourself, and we had the site survey done, and with the soil testing to really confirm that that the soil was good and that grapes would be a good choice for us. And luckily we found out that they were. So we had a year then once we were able to team up with our awesome winery partner and order the vines. We had a year to prep the site, rock pick, do all those things. We had a great amount of time to really make sure that things were prepared as well as they could before planting.
Great. So which are your vineyard characteristics and the varieties grown there?
So we are, as it turns out, it wasn't the plan originally, but we're 100% vinifera. Just turned out that way. That's what was available. So we have Chardonnay, mostly 95. We have some 76 on SO4, and mostly 3309 is what is doing better for us. Pinot Noir 115. Again, mostly on 3309, some SO4s, and Pinot Meunier on SO4. And we we have 7-foot rows and 3-foot feet spacing, and our density is 1,351 vines per acre.
So higher density.
Yes.
So until now, because come on, you have the conditions and a lot of vinifera, which has been the main challenges until now?
The main challenges are for us being new and learning. It's timing, getting to know the timing of everything, and labor. But again, once it's really the timing and knowing when we need extra help, and getting it done. This year being our first harvest and third year, it was our first year pruning, and our first year tying vines down as well. And so by the time we finished pruning, and we were so proud of that, we didn't realize it was a race to the finish to tie down. And then we were actually late, and some vines we were just tucking at the end, and as bud break happened. So as we get more experience and go through the years, then I can see how we are better to anticipate our needs. But yeah, it's timing and just knowing the vineyard and knowing when to get extra help in, and yeah.
Yeah, it's a process, no? To know how.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, okay, yes, starting, as you said, the first harvest. So which are your sources of information?
So, well, these best practice sessions, they are awesome. Our winery is awesome. And so we reach out and ask lots of questions of them. I have a our great growing community around me of other growers and new growers. We really talk. I ask a lot of questions, and just do our own research. I took 2018 to take the NSCC Introductory to Grape Growing course, and that really helped too. But again, it's really being in the vineyard and knowing your vineyard and being able to recognize sort of what you're looking at, and being able to call on people to come in and confirm, and to know for sure what you're looking at.
That makes a big difference, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, now that you have more experience and it has been a learning curve for sure, which recommendations would you have for people starting?
I think you have to decide, probably going in, your level of commitment. I think that for us, we had to really commit 100% and know that that we were going to be there and hands-on, boots on the ground, in the vineyard every day scouting. That's made all the difference. It's I think it's much harder. The custom vineyard work was very attractive, but it doesn't replace the timing is so of everything. It just really the growing season is so short that you have to be on it, and the weather, and just knowing that you're able to respond right away when you notice things, and stay on top. So I think just know that you're committed and do your homework, and don't be afraid to ask questions, and yeah.
Yeah, don't be shy, no? If you have a doubt, go and ask.
Yeah.
Cool. So what would you do differently if you had to restart?
I don't know, maybe not jump in with 10 acres, maybe to start. It was a bit daunting. My husband's like a go big or go home kind of guy. So we just decided to jump in, but 10 acres is a lot. 11 acres, we're over 11 now. It's a lot for a small grower like we are to maintain. So you really have to plan it out and know where you're going to get extra help from. And I don't drive a tractor myself yet, so I have someone awesome who's learning everything with us, and we're learning together, and it's been working for us. But yeah, that would it would be great to have learned on a much smaller scale, I guess, but we're in it now and it's working.
Perfect. Yes, I know it's working quite good. So last question, which are your plans for the future?
I don't know. Just my plans are for the future. Keep doing what we're doing. We've learned so much now with harvest. I have so many things that I want to do differently next year. I've already noticed, I have a list of how I can improve on this year for next year. And so, yeah, my plans are just to keep plugging away and be a good grower to our winery. And yeah, that's about it.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. Thank you to give the opportunity to share your thoughts, your experience, and give some advices of how it has been for you, all this process of growing grapes in a very short time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anne-Marie. And don't give up making those lists of things to change for next year, because we've been doing it here for over 10 years. And every year we make a list of what we're going to fine tune for the next year. So it's a process that never ends, for sure. So next, Francisco is going to take us through 2021 year and kind of give us his high points of the season and let us know how it went.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, thank you. So good evening, everyone. Today we'll be talking about growing season 2021. You will see a lot of similarities with Jeff's presentation, so I will be very brief and precise. We'll be talking about climate conditions such as temperatures, precipitations, frost-free days, and growing degree days. Plus, very brief, the grapevine conditions, like phenological stages, deficiencies, production, and finally with some activities post-harvest to keep in mind. So already Jeff mentioned that the temperatures and the mean degrees Celsius per month were slightly higher. And here I'm comparing the last 5 years. I have been only since 2017, so I just wanted to show you a little of the differences. And May especially is quite interesting to see, like 2021, we started with 11 degrees, which has some similarities with 18 and 17. You can, as you remember, 19 was quite cold, so there is a clear difference. And also June and July, it's interesting to see like 2021 was the warmest year, and big difference, especially with 18 and 19. Sadly, we had that frost in 18. And also how increased the temperature in July. Again, it's quite interesting to see the fluctuation. And I jump immediately to September and October, and I would like to get your attention, especially, of course, 2021 and with 2017. You can see like 17 was quite warm with 17.6 and 12.7 September, October, while 2021, 16.8 and 11.3. So we have some similarities on the temperature. It's quite interesting to see this. In terms of precipitation, well, already Jeff mentioned more on 21 than 2020. And I would like to get your attention, especially May, June 2021, we have in May 106 millimeters. The average is 85, so it was a huge amount of water in the soil profile, while in June it diminished to 37.2. Okay, so it decreased a lot the temperature, but it's this rain already Jeff mentioned arrives just suddenly in one time. So July, pay attention of how much rain we have in July, 164 millimeters, the average is 86. So we almost duplicate that amount. And it's tricky, this precipitation, because it can affect bloom. So it wouldn't be a surprise if you see bunches with less berries, because it will be possible to have some abortion due to this high amount of rainfall. Again, pay attention to August and September. We have 121 and 168 millimeters. which is a high amount of precipitation, plus the combination of the high temperature, or not the high, but the highest temperature compared to previous season, it can impact in a higher disease pressure. And also it can affect a little bit the ripening if it can diminish and can affect somehow the berries. So I pay attention again to October, because even though we had a lot of precipitation in August and September, which helped a lot to increase the size of the berries, we were a little concerned if this was going to affect too much to the grape quality. Well, it diminished a little bit the precipitation with 64.3 millimeters, but we are below the average, which is 116. Again, pay attention to 2017 was the year with lowest precipitation with only 42 millimeters. Total, again, we have 898.6, which is a little more than 200 millimeters compared to 2020. And still the season with less amount of precipitation was 2017 with 600 millimeters approximately. In terms of frost-free days, we have one of the longest season if we compare the last couple of years, and we have 196 days in total. In May 8, we have almost a frost, almost with 0.6 degrees Celsius, and on October 9 with 0.2. So it's quite positive to have this longest time period with 196 days, especially if we compare the total with the previous one. Well, 18 was quite short, and 2020, it was short, but it depends on the area. So we have to be very careful where we are taking a look to this data. Already we were talking about the growing degree days, the official information that you can find in the Grape blog. It's until September 19 with 153 growing degree days, with an average of the last 5 and 10 years with almost 1,100 growing degree days. Okay, it's quite positive. And at that time, the year with higher growing degree days, which sounds like a contradiction, was 2018 with 117. And the estimation until November, it's around 1,284. I put at the start because I get the information from the webpage, so it can have some variations. The official is what Jeff is providing. So here you can see in the graph the difference that we already mentioned. And if you want to take a look more to this graph and data, please take a look to the Grape blog to the last update of the weather. Grapevine conditions, phenological stages. Well, this varies a lot depending on variety and location. But more or less, bad bears was May 14 for hybrids and May 21 for vinifera. And it was this at least 10 days earlier than 2020. Again, it can vary depending the variety. Okay, here you can see Bac au Noir that was already with bad bears on May 14, maybe even earlier. Bloom was on June 19 for hybrids and on June 26 for vinifera. So you can see that it was a good time for bloom if we didn't have tons and tons of precipitation, and some varieties were luckier than others. Here you can see Frontenac with full bloom. Amber raisin started in some varieties in August 14, while in August 14 for hybrids and on August 24 for vinifera. Here you have a bunch of Pinot Noir and Pinot of August. And harvest, well, that will vary. Some people was harvesting depending the goal, as Neslihan mentioned, depending the numbers of which was the purpose of the vineyard. Deficiencies. This is something to pay attention again. We saw a couple of different deficiencies such as zinc and boron. This can be different micronutrients, so it's important to pay attention carefully to the tissue analysis to take a look and target the proper nutrient. Also, we saw some combination of nutrients. Here you can see in this photo, a combination of iron and nitrogen on the same leaf. And as well, potassium. When you can see on the bottom and ripening, this yellow pattern on the vineyard, it can be that you have some potassium deficiency. So it's very important to be taking tissue samples at bloom and veraison, or at least choose one day to be able to see what is happening in the plant and to apply the necessary nutrients. So again, with more data, it will be easier to take decisions and tackle which are the main issues. And in that way, we can have better health conditions for the plants, better fruit quality, and the next year we'll have a better bud burst. So the production, the yield increase in different areas of the province. The precipitations definitely help to increase the berry size, okay? And a couple of main observations are more number of buds after pruning compared to 2020. So more number of buds, they were able to allow us to get a more crop. The bud burst, the percentage of bud burst was around 90%, okay, in some depending the variety. And the precipitations at bloom in some varieties affected to have a good pollination. So it was not unusual to see less berries per batch. A couple of activities post-harvest, well, nets are going out of the vineyard, or in some cases are already out. Exceptions are only for ice wine producers. And it's starting the pruning plan right now. So it's a good idea to compare with previous seasons and set production goals. Okay, so take a look of what happened and tuning or tailor it properly to your place and variety. So it's the opportunity to evaluate the places with more disease pressure in your vineyard. So if you identify that a specific variety in a special location had more disease, it's important to see, okay, which disease, when it happened, so the next year to be prepared to start spraying from this location. Also, it's the time to be fixing the trellis system, depending areas where you can have some damage, and evaluate the production per variety. So in that way, you can be tailoring also your pruning. Before passing to the last part of the session with discussion, I would like to invite you from the Grapes to Wine School Climate webinars. This is the second season that we are doing with Neslihan Ivit, the winemaking and innovation specialist. And at this time, we have two speakers for viticulture. Dr. Joanna Doring from Geisenheim University, who will be talking about the efficiency in different cropping systems, such as organic, biodynamic, and conventional, to compare numbers. We'll have Marco Simonit from Simonit and Sirch, Italy, to talk about pruning and how to tackle the trunk diseases through pruning. So it will be quite interesting. We'll go also to enology and winemaking part to talk with Dr. Vivienne Meste from University of British Columbia to talk about yeast and how they are coming from the vineyard. Dr. Maret Dutoit from Stellenbosch University in South Africa to talk about bacteria also coming from the vineyard. So we'll have both fermentations in enology. And we'll have David Stasiuk from Nuance Winery Supplies from Ontario, who will be talking about flash détente, a different winemaking technique to be producing and extracting more colors. So with this, I want to finish my presentation and pass to the last section of the question part between the discussion between Steve Ells and Marcel Kolb. In the chat, you can find the link from the Nova Scotia Grape blog where you can find all the information about the speakers and the registration link for this webinar session. So Steve, Marcel, thank you very much. Glad to see you again. And we are wrapping up the season. So I would like to start asking about how was the period of time between bud burst until bloom? And Marcel, you said good evening, so I will start with you.
Bud burst till bloom. Well, it was pretty much the perfect scenario. It was a really early start, bud break, very even throughout the vineyards. There wasn't much that was lagging behind. Some of the Riesling was slow. but eventually then caught up. So overall, it was really looking good. It was a really good start for the year.
Steve, how was in your side?
Good. Yeah, I thought we had a fantastic start. Looking at your data and Jeff's data, it wasn't really wet then. We got through. We do a lot of spring tillage. We found the soil temperature really came up fast this year, and the plants really got off to a great start. So, like Marcel said, we found they were quite even. Not maybe as much variation we've seen, and then. With the good season last year, without too much disease pressure, and then coming into this season with a good start, we saw more of a full recovery from the effects of 18 and 19. So yeah, it was a good start.
Okay, so were you applying or doing something special in the vineyard just to help this recovery, Steve?
Well, yeah, I mean, we do quite a bit of tissue sampling and sap sampling as well. So we kind of come up with a program in the wintertime, looking at last year's results, if the vines need anything to start with. So every year we kind of jig our what foliar nutrients we're going to put on to give them a little push at the start. We tend to push pretty hard at that first start, like up until the 8 leaf seeds part. We often get a couple applications of some nutrients or micronutrients on there just to really get them off to a good start. So it was a little different this year, but it's different every year because we really go by what the plant ended up with at the end of the season.
Okay. Marcel, in the same sense, do you do something like that, like tissue samples or applying something to the vines to help them to produce through the year?
Yeah, so we have quite a vigorous nutrient program that's soil based. So we're bringing our soils up to what the plant likes the best first, and then start doing the adjustments or the fine adjustments foliar. So we haven't done any leaf samples this year. Because the last 2 years there was barely any deficiencies that we found, so it was just locally that we had to do a few adjustments. So overall, this year was pretty good on the nutritional side.
Perfect. So I'm glad to hear that it was quite even, and with the precipitation, it helped a lot to that. So Marcel, like between July and August, we already saw, thanks to Jeff, that we have high amount of precipitation.
Yes.
Do you have something, any extra cautious in that time?
Well, it seemed like the dry time before the big rain was we seen the big push, but then we also saw the big stop in it, and it seemed like the plants were waiting for something to happen, and well, it did. So we did get a huge amount of rain, and the plants just started to take off. Combined with the temperatures that we had, it was pretty much a race to the top wire. Within a couple of days, like you see them grow, and that of course got us a little bit, or got all of us swimming, trying to find the right change for the chemicals to use, changing the spray program, adjusting to all the rain, rethinking especially the nutrition that we have put on foliar, hoping that might work, or if all got washed off. So there was a lot of rethinking the original strategy that was given to us throughout the first couple of months that were so good.
Steve, how was in your case? It changed too much the scenario? You had to adjust?
Yeah, well, we came into July kind of post bloom and stuff thinking, we were kind of doing 8 to 14 days ahead, thinking pretty good about everything. And then everything kind of came to that stop. And then it was that matter of maybe stretching the spray intervals a little bit in June to really tighten them up in July and into the first part of August. But I mean, as challenging as it was, I think it was probably good for the vines, you know, to really get them to grow and get that foliage on this year. They got off to such a great start. But yeah, one thing that we found is with the hybrids we run through with mechanical deleafer, and there was so much foliar we didn't, but we were definitely thinking of running a second pass through. We had so much regrowth on the leaves in our hybrids that it was almost like we hadn't deleafed them. And you know, you run into all these little challenges. You think you've got it nailed, and then it's so vigorous and so much foliar growth. It's just going crazy. But like Marcel said, it was a very challenging time to keep them disease free. There was a lot of spraying went on, a couple extra applications. We were very lucky. We hit all our marks and we kept our vines clean, but I know there were some real challenges out there, you know, and it was a tough period of time.
Steve, did you have any issue with the tacking process as well? Because everything grew too fast? Or?
Yeah. kind of like Anne-Marie was saying, you know, where do you find the extra people to keep up with it when it's growing like that? You know, hats off to our crew. They really dug down and did a great job. We got through it, and you know, I think we had it in control. There was times when the vineyard looked a little messy, but we got caught up. You know, it's not always the most efficient to get behind, but we did get them tucked in. There was, you know, we did one extra pass this year with the hedger that we wouldn't have really liked to do, but it's one of those vigorous years. You know, we had the heat and the rain both. So as much as we were complaining about the rain and the extra moisture, maybe we shouldn't. You know, I think at the end of the year, and we're going to talk about in a minute, I think we had great quality grapes. So I think you struggle through the challenging parts and do what you have to do.
Marcel, in your case, just to take part of the question to Steve, how was tacking or deleafing, or when you start to deleaf, just to be ahead of time?
I can barely recall what was going on at that time. So it's just, it really hit us hard. Yeah, with that growth spurts that the rain and the heat brought, it was just a scramble on which row next to tackle. So yes, the crews had some extra work this year for sure. It was a little challenging. Deleafing, we saw the same thing. Some of the hybrids, they seem to have some extra foliage in the fruiting zone this year. We did do a second pass on some of the hybrids, just to open it up a little bit more. Some of the vinifera we tried with only doing one side, and then later on doing the rest by hand. So that was a different strategy as well this year, which we had great success last year, but the timing was a little bit off this year because of all the tucking that we had to do in between. So yeah, the timing was definitely off a little bit, but the end, it came out just as great. But yeah, the spray program this year, that was definitely the big one to go with all the shoot growth.
I will touch again the deleafing, but now that we are passing to this part about the ripening, because first, how for you, Marcel, how was the ripening through harvest? How was that period of time?
It started off fairly slow, but it did. Once it started to set in, it looked first a little uneven, but then within like 2 or 3 days, everything else started to caught up too. So the varieties, they were not earlier, maybe by 2 or 3 days. So nothing significant to mention. So everything seemed to be back on time as average would usually dictate.
And Steve, how was in your case?
Yeah, good. We were just a little ahead of average, I think, on the ripening process. We found they were pretty even this year. We went really hard at the deleafing on the vinifera and total hand deleafing on the vinifera, and I think that really saved us this year for keeping the crop clean and then evening it up and getting it. But overall, we were very pleased with the quality and the numbers that we got off of the fruit this year.
Okay, so did you have any variety that surprised you more than others this season? They say, oh my God, it was coming not very good or very good, and it was a positive result as well.
I think I'd say the young vines. You know, we have some young vines that just in that fourth and fifth leaf stage, right? Fourth and fifth year. And we were really happy how they kind of settled in this year. They took a big step forward and evened up. Great quality fruit, and we could see a lot of progression there. Kind of looking forward to next year with those ones.
So I already mentioned about the deleafing. So can you see any difference in terms of quality or sanitary conditions of your fruit with the deleafing technique?
Well, I certainly know with our vinifera, whether, you know, especially I'd say with Chardonnay, probably, we didn't have any trouble at all with sour rot or botrytis in the Chardonnay. And I would attribute that a lot to deleafing. Like we do 100% deleaf of the fruit zone. We try to have it so the top cluster on the shoot would just be slightly shaded by the first leaf that would be on that shoot. So, you know, I definitely was through a few other vineyards, and I know there were some issues with botrytis, and it was a great year for botrytis. I mean, botrytis must have loved this because with sugars were up a little bit, it was wet, humid, everything was perfect for it. But I think our deleafing program attribute to how healthy and the quality of our fruit.
Marcel, in your case, I want to restart. Any plant or variety that take your attention or was very positive for you, and how impactful or relevant is the deleafing, and depending for varieties as well?
Well, on the vinifera side, definitely the Riesling and the Chard this year. They have produced very, very well. We had 100% deleafing last year in both of those varieties. And the results did show this year again. There's a much better, we have a much better bud count. We have much better fruit. It seems just overall to be a lot even in not just in growth, but also in bearing of fruit. So we definitely deleafed everything again this year, and especially with all that rain that we had, and I'm agreeing with that on with Steve as well. The more leaves you get out of the way, the more airflow we have around the clusters, and it definitely helps you with botrytis. Like we had very, very, very little in both varieties. So overall, it was a very clean fruit. On the hybrid side, it was actually the Leon that surprised me this year. It was a hybrid that performed very well, even though it's a very vigorous vine. And yes, they definitely did take off this year, but the fruit was very nice on it. So it was a surprise on that variety.
And Marcel, do you deleaf that variety as well?
We're doing all the reds. We're handing to 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. So, okay. So overall, we're all in agreement that the quality this year was better, and I can hear that your management techniques, well, you have a calendar and activities aligned in a way that you use the sprayer, but also the climate at your site. So now, in terms of post-harvest, which are your main activities or considerations? What are you considering now? Marcel, please.
Post-harvest. Post-harvest was pretty much everything you didn't have time during harvest. So it's definitely time to wrap up the vineyard, make sure that everything is put away, all your netting, everything is stored, all your equipment is looked after. And there's also time now to look after your trellis, fix that post you missed in the summer. Replace a few wires if you have to. We're already counting replacement vines. There is just, there's a lot of pre-freeze things going on that you can wrap up now, and you don't have to look after it in spring. So that's pretty much what we're doing. We're also already started to collect some budwood, so that's in full swing, and it will just translate into full pruning.
Okay. And Steven, which stage you are right now?
Yeah, we're pretty much at the same stage. So we're wrapping the vineyard up. Our netting's all in. We had one little block of Chardonnay for late harvest, which boy, that just seemed to be hanging out there. We couldn't get those nets in. It was driving me crazy. We had all the other nets in, but we had this one little half-acre block that the nets were out until about a week ago. So, but the nets are all in. We're applying lime in the fall and then spading it in. So we do every other row in the fall with the spader. So we're almost done that. We put some compost in same time with the lime, separate application. But anyway, kind of getting that worked in. So and kind of taking some walkthroughs now, just kind of checking for how good the wood looks, if it's fully lignified everywhere. We're kind of getting our heads wrapped around pruning, take that walk through, checking the health of the wood. But then you're saying, yeah, I'd cut there, and looking at our harvest yields and saying, well, are we going to lay a little more, a few more buds down, a few less buds down, just kind of block by block. So yeah, we're getting a pruning plan made, and looking at the health of the wood, and we're not seeing too many problems anywhere. But I mean, you may, if you saw some problems, if you saw some dirty wood, right, you might think a little harder about an oil in the spring or a lime sulfur in the spring or something. But yeah, that's kind of where we are.
To define your pruning, are you considering also which is the goal of your vineyard? I mean, in terms of production or what you want to achieve?
Yeah, oh, for sure. Yeah, so it's we've got a couple blocks now that in the past have been for sparkling production, and now the winery's kind of suggesting they want a couple blocks kept for still production, and Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So we're pruning those a little bit different. Another thing in some of our hybrids that we're actually thinking about pruning a little bit different is we're trying to tighten up our fruit zone. We've kept the fruit zone pretty low in the past. We're actually trying to bring it up and tighten it up a little bit because we've been doing a little more machine harvesting in the past couple of years. So we're trying to get that tightened up a little bit more. Yeah, certainly, the blocks that we want to keep for still will be pruned down a little bit more aggressively than the ones we're sparkling, where you maybe hang a little bit more fruit.
Perfect. And Marcel, do you consider a little bit the production as well, or which is the purpose of your vineyard for pruning?
Yeah, absolutely. We're already thinking about and what our goals should be for next year. Which blocks have performed well. So we're looking at the data and deciding already, where to leave a little bit more for next year. Where to cut out maybe a little bit more, just to balance it out for what the winery actually wants. This is also a great idea to have like your post-harvest meeting with your winery, that they can most likely already give you some inputs on what they're looking for next year, and that will make it so much easier to decide on which way you want to prune. but yes, we're absolutely already in planning of that.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Marcel and Steve. It has been quite interesting to be covering from bud burst until post-harvest. So we are already talking in the harvest of 2022 right now, I think. So, well,
yeah,
you will see how fast moves everything. So, Steve, please, the word is all yours.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, this has been a great year, I think, for another great year of best practices. And I think we're getting settled into this thought that they're probably not going to be live sessions anymore. I think the webinars are very effective to reaching a lot more people, and people don't have to travel. I'd really like to thank Francisco and all of Perennia for putting this together. It's a great collaboration with Grape Growers Association and Perennia on this. All the presenters, Jeff from AAFC, I mean, it's great. It's such a hard job to get him to talk about weather 5 or 6 times a year, but we talk him into it. So it's just been a great year, and I really appreciate how much effort and how much time all the presenters and everyone puts into this, because it really comes across as a class act, I think. And I'd also like to thank everyone that tunes into these, because this is why we do it. And I love Anna Marie's story, you know, that's using us as a resource, you know, to help her get through these years. And it's great. And I think there's so much good information come out of these every year. So every session. So thanks very much. And we are definitely planning on another year of best practices. Francisco and I have been talking about it already. So stay tuned. We'll get started up. We're hoping to do a pruning session, kind of building off the momentum of the webinar that Francisco is going to do with Marco. So we'll get going early in the year. Thanks very much, everyone.